Hi, I'm John DeDakis. I'm a manuscript editor, a writing coach, a novelist, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. You're one to one with me, and I'm one to one with Nick Chiarkas. Nick was told by his mother was told by his fourth grade principal that he wasn't going to amount to much, and that she should just steer him into a career that was, stable, safe, not a big deal. Nick turned out okay, became a U.S. Army paratrooper, a cop, a lawyer, was on the president's commission fighting organized crime, and he's written 9 traditionally published books. So, Ma, he turned out okay. Nick, welcome to One to One.
I think she should have listened to the principal. It would have been easier.
I really want to know what it was that, I mean, did your mom tell you that when the principal told her?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I'll do it briefly.
Okay.
But
Okay.
but stop me if I'm going on and on, John. Um, and not many people know this story. So I was actually sitting outside of the principal's office. It was the end of the day, PS1 on Henry Street, still there. But don't tell anyone about that. And the principal's secretary had left for the day, and my mother was in the room with the principal, and door was open. I was waiting outside, and I heard him tell my mother that I was, his word, stupid, and that I would never graduate from high school. She should gear me toward a secure vocation as best I can remember.
Mm.
My father's Greek, my mother Italian, and she was a second generation Italian that thought principals were ordained by God. So
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
mother wasn't putting up a fight with the principal. But a teacher had come back. I won't say her name. I don't know why I won't say her name. But she went out shopping at Gogol's Delicatessen, picked up some groceries, and had forgotten some stuff in her classroom, came back, walked past me, and obviously could hear the principal and what he was saying, and saw me sitting there. She knew me. I love her.
Mhm.
She took me by the hand and took me to the teacher's lounge. She asked me if I liked tea, and I had never had tea. And she made her a cup of tea and me a cup of tea. And she reached in her grocery bag and she took out a pound cake with a vanilla frosting. And I might have been, I forget the brand, but it was quite common. And asked me if I liked this cake. And I said something like, I really like the frosting.
Mhm.
So she cut the cake this way,
Mhm.
horizontally,
Mhm.
with about a half inch of cake and the rest frosting. And then she cut it in half and gave me half, and she ate half. And she talked to me. First time an adult talked to me like I was, like I mattered.
Mhm.
She gave me a book, um, and she told me to read everything I can get my hands on.
Mhm.
Um, she told me she thought I was smart,
Mhm.
creative, and she told me to always eat the icing off the cake. I looked at the book. I still have it. And it was Yesterday and Today, a collection of poems by, I think it's um, Oppenmeyer. Anyway, I said to her, I can't read poems. I'm in the fourth grade. She said, Yes, you can. I said, I'm in the fourth grade. And she said, Read them. And I did. And at first, I didn't know what they were about. And then I read the, the Biggest Strong Man and The Littler Boy, and then Her Letter by Bret Harte, and then The Highwayman. And I started being moved by this poetry. When I got my um, doctorate, I tracked it down and mailed it to her. Well, I mailed her a copy of it
Mhm.
with a note that said, look what you did. But I'll always, always remember her. And the importance of talking to a kid, I wasn't a nice kid. I was a bit of a troublemaker. I got in trouble. I was in a gang. I was also an Eagle Scout. But I was trouble. But she took the time. And for all you teachers out there whom I love, you don't know the impact you have on a child. You don't know. I might have never mailed that to her, and she would never have known what happened to little Nicky Chiarkas. But you have moved, every teacher, you have moved and saved so many kids. Please know that.
Do you have any idea why the principal told your mother that?
I was bored in class. I know that I would sit in class and gaze out the window, or sometimes I would pretend I was flying an airplane while I was sitting. I would be lost in thought. And I think other teachers reported that to the principal, that, there's something wrong with Nicky Chiarkas. He's not paying attention. He can't keep focused on the lecture or what we're doing or whatever it was that we were supposed to be doing in the 4th grade.
Yeah. And so this teacher who, in a sense, befriended you, did she ever have you in class?
Yes, she did.
Okay.
She did. She had me, I think, in the 3rd grade or the 2nd grade. And she was just a lovely, lovely woman. And looking back, she truly cared about not me personally, but each of us little kids. They touched her in some way. She cared about their future.
Did you sense that your life began to turn around what, in the 5th grade, or when would you say that you were able to shed your self-perception that you were stupid and had no future? When did you see that you could amount to something?
Not yet.
Or have you yet? Yeah.
No. I'm getting close. I'm getting close. When I was 11 years old, and I was in a gang primarily to protect myself, and other kids would group together, and we would be the Cherry Street Boys, or we were the Grim Reapers.
Oh, geez.
Anyway,
this is like West Side Story, right?
Well, yeah, I worked at Gokul's Delicatessen. I would deliver groceries, and gangs would know when they would see a kid delivering a box with groceries in it. When he came back, he would have money in his pocket.
Right.
And they would chase me. And I became very good at being able to run on top of a roof and go from one street to the other by jumping from rooftop to rooftop to rooftop to rooftop.
Oh my God.
And I would wind up at the New York Public Library, and I would get in through the roof and go down to the fiction section. And I would look out the window, and if the Popeyes or the other gang was still out there, I would just sit. I remembered Mrs. Singer, that was her name. And I would read until they were gone. And then I would safely go downstairs and out and back to Gogol's and give him his money. And he would say, "You're late." And I would say I was chased. And he would say, "All right." And
it's like reading saved your life.
Yes.
In more ways than one.
I often say when I'm talking at a library that libraries have saved my life, literally and figuratively. Yes. Yes.
At what point did you have a sense of, I don't know if calling is the right word, but a sense of direction in terms of career? How did that begin to crystallize?
I don't know why this quality was in me, but there were lots of gangs in the projects and on the Lower East Side. And a lot of tough kids would shake down little kids, especially when we were going into school and take away their lunch money or their gloves or whatever. I always had the sense that I should somehow step in there. I wasn't a big guy. I was a little guy, but I would try to break up and say, leave this kid alone. And often, more often than not, I would catch a beating. But I didn't like bullies. Hate might be, well, hate's not too strong. I hate bullies. I hate the guy that berates the waitress. I hate the bullies that take your money away. And I always felt like I wanted to step between whoever the victim was and the bully to this day. I, I, I think that's what directed me toward the various things that I wanted. And sometimes I was, so the first fight I ever got into as a gang member was another gang member. We had a Grim Reapers and this other gang. I think it was the Popeyes. And so I was the guy.
What year would this have been?
1957.
Okay.
So I was the kid that was going to fight the other kid from the Popeyes, and we fought, and I cried as we were fighting. I couldn't help it. I don't know why.
What kind of weapons? Was it fists
Just
or
fists,
chains?
yeah.
Okay, got it.
And I think I was, excuse me, I think I was partly embarrassed and nervous, like performance anxiety.
Right.
But also in the fight, I kept fighting, but I was crying. And I'll give away something here. So from that point on, the Popeyes and other people in the neighborhood referred to us as the Weepers instead of the Grim Reapers. We became the Weepers.
Well, hold that thought, because interesting that you would mention that, because I believe this is your first novel. Am I right, Weepers?
It is. It is.
Okay. Well, and it's set in New York City in 1957.
And that's us.
Yeah. Is that really?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is pretty much ripped from reality, right?
And that little guy isn't the smallest guy on the end is me.
I mean, is that a picture? Is that actually?
It was a picture that we modified.
Okay. Okay. Well, since we have it up here, why don't you talk a little bit about your first novel? I want to talk about the writing process and all that eventually, but since we're talking about the Weepers or the Grim Reapers, tell us about this novel and how it correlates with your own experience in a gang.
Wow. So from my experience, just from when I decided that I wanted to write a novel, and I wish I wrote my two novels before I wrote nonfiction, because I think my nonfiction might have been better. But when I wanted to write, my doctorate is in sociology, primarily in social deviance. And when I wanted to do two things. I wanted Angelo, who is the protagonist, side note. At first, his name was Nicky, me, and he couldn't do anything wrong. He was the marvelous, tough, wonderful. I had to get rid of Nicky right away. So I wanted Angelo to be both emblematic of what it's like to grow up poor in a New York City housing project in the 50s. And poverty, being poor was more than just not having enough money. Being poor was a sense of self, not just loathing, but you're just not good enough. So if I was in a fight with another kid on a rooftop and we both fell off and died, and the other kid was a middle-class kid from uptown, I win because he had more to lose than me.
Mm.
So the feeling was like always being a private in a city that idolized officers, captains, and generals of different businesses. Um, I wanted him to be that kid, and at the same time, I wanted this to be a little bit of like a roman à clef, uh, uh, memoir that has a facade of fiction over it.
Mhm.
I wanted it to be real places. I wanted it to be through my glance, through my eyes, through my mirror, how I saw the world,
Mhm.
and try to, and at the same time, try to be more testing the way I felt and talking to other kids. Is that the way you felt? What did you
Mhm.
see?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so Weepers seemed to be the right name for it because, like the story I told, my uncle, when I told him what happened and that I cried and everybody's calling us weepers, I don't want to go to school anymore.
Yeah.
He took out a pen and he wrote the word weepers on my shoulder. And he said, change the name of your gang, own it, be proud of it, make it your own, take it away from them.
Mhm.
And we did that, and we changed our name to the Weepers. And there was something about that and owning the streets and owning the projects and seeing at my Uncle Mario telling me that not everybody gets to grow up in the projects. Think about what you've learned from it. Think about we were standing in the projects. Mario is the guy, I'm giving you more than you want. Mario is the guy that is Nunzio.
Mhm.
Um, and tough guy. I love him. Um, he heard us talking about, I want to be a longshoreman or I want to work for the newspaper good overtime and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And he said, don't decide what you want to do. Decide the kind of man you want to be. Want to be a stand-up man? Think about what you've gone through. Think about what you're going through and wear it like a badge. So don't be ashamed of the projects. Wear it like a badge. Not everybody gets to grow up there. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I want to go back to that and Nunzio's way, but I want to get back to your personal story. So, you went into the service and became a paratrooper. Was that before college or grad school or any of those things?
Yeah. So I was an insecure kid.
Hmm.
I think mostly I got into fights because I was afraid to run away.
Hmm.
Um, I I saw a picture. This is true. I was patriotic. I was 18 years old. I just graduated from high school. Um, I saw a picture of a paratrooper. It was an army recruiting thing, and he's coming down at night, and he has all these sacks hanging on him, and he's all alone. And I stared at that and thought, I want to be able to do that. I
Hmm.
want to be so self sufficient that I can do something like that and not be afraid. Um, of course, when
So
I
did you enlist?
so I enlisted 3 years. I
What year was that?
1962.
Okay, so with the Vietnam War has not really gotten started yet.
It was
Um,
starting up.
yes.
They told us we signed up, my buddy and I, for airborne unassigned, which basically means send us to any place you want. We had lots of choices, but we didn't know. We wanted to wear boots and a scarf, and uh, uh, it was. I was. I I got to airborne school. I became a paratrooper, and I looked around, and everybody was like me. They were 18 years old. That John Wayne wasn't there. It wasn't that guy that was coming down at night. We were all kids.
So were you sent to Vietnam?
I would. No, I was not. I would. I was not, and if I could let that go, I would let that go.
What do you mean?
Um, I was sent elsewhere. Uh, in '64, but not something I ever talk about,
I mean,
ever.
are you able to talk about it? I mean, what are you? I mean, I'll go as deep as I can before you tell me to stop. But let me ask it this way: was being a paratrooper and being airborne, was it what you had expected?
Um, yeah, it was. What? Um, can I back up for a second?
Sure.
What I didn't expect, and again, I'm a kid from the projects, and the cool thing about living on the Lower East Side and in the projects is it wasn't a melting pot. There wasn't, right? There were Puerto Rican kids and black kids, and there were Jewish kids, Greek kids, Italian, Irish, but we didn't blend, and that was, I think, a good thing. It was
Mhm.
different kinds of foods and smells and accents, and I loved it. But I was also naive in that. So my best friend and I, we get down to we're going to Fort Benning, Georgia for jump school. This is after basic training and advanced infantry training in New Jersey, Fort Dix, and
Mhm.
so we're going down to specialized school. And our captain, before we go, said to us, "Your country is proud of you. President is proud of you. You guys have volunteered for service in Southeast Asia. We wish you well, and the country loves you."
Mhm.
And so my friend Elwood Dallas, a kid from Newark, and I flew down together to Columbus, Georgia. And we flew down on a Saturday. We thought we'd get a hotel room, first get a drink someplace, and then go to
Mhm.
Fort Benning Monday morning.
Mhm.
And we walked into a diner and we missed the sign that said whites only. And Elwood was black. And we got into a fight in the bar with locals and a deputy. And we were both arrested by the sheriff, who took us into the jail and then said to us, "I'll give you two choices. You can sit in the jail all weekend and we'll go to court Monday morning, or I'll drive you to Fort Benning right now. And you stay there and you don't come back to Columbus." And we said, "Okay, we'll go to Fort Benning."
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know that. I thought the country was proud of us. We were in uniform. I thought the country loved us and that they were proud of Elwood and proud of me. And we were soldiers. And certainly people would see us on the street and say, "Wow, good for you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this." But they didn't. Um,
That must have been incredibly disillusioning.
it was an implication point in my life.
What do you mean?
It it uh, like on a business chart where it's going up and then there's a dot and it suddenly drops or it goes.
Yeah.
That was one of those points in my life where I said, "This is bullshit. Country's not proud of us. This is
Mhm.
not, we're not going to Southeast Asia to fight for all Americans and they're all with us. They care more about whether or not you can have a hamburger with me in a particular dine. And we could do it on base when we got to Fort Benning. Him and
Mhm.
I
So
could
how
go get a beer.
so how did that change your life?
Um, when I became, well, it changed it in the Army, certainly, and the way I looked at what we were doing. So, for example, the no, I'm going to say something, but I don't want to talk about it. So the combat that I've seen was, for me, not about America and defending democracy and fighting for my country. It was about fighting for Elwood, who was next to me, or my other buddy. And that's it. That's all I cared about. I didn't care about being an American hero or or any of that crap. I cared about the soldiers the kids my gang.
So when you got out of the Army after having had that real, I don't know, wake up call about, the insidious racism that it's in our DNA. It goes all the way back to the 1600s, but that was sort of a wake up call for you.
Still,
Um, Still, so you get out of the service, and then what?
so I get out of the service, and so I don't when I get out of the service, I don't receive a warm welcome from liberals generally.
Because you got out of the service in what year?
65.
Okay, so the Vietnam War has definitely heated up. By this time, LBJ is
Yep.
using Goldwater's prescription. LBJ ran as the peace candidate, and Goldwater wanted to bomb the hell out of him. LBJ was elected and then bombed the hell out of him,
Yeah.
and was reduced to only one really elected once, and then he had to basically not run for re-election because the Vietnam War was so unpopular by this time, and by guilt by association, because you were had been in the military, even though you didn't serve in Vietnam, you were in a sense castigated for being part of the green machine, right?
That, and you know this better than I do, and then I'll go back to your question. That, and we could have had a peace treaty, but Nixon killed it. As he
to get elected.
To get elected, right?
To get elected.
So all of that was going on as well, and so not treated great by liberals generally. Looking for a job, I got a job at. I took the police test because my father was a cop. Two of my uncles were cops. Another uncle was a fireman. I knew how to march and wear a uniform. I took the police test. I passed it. I was waiting to be called. I got a job in a jewelry store on 5th Avenue and 55th Street, Mario Bucciolati's. It was a wonderful, wonderful jewelry store. And then I became a cop. And as a cop, liberals still didn't like me.
Right.
In fact, I'll tell you something that very few people know, and I'll even use real names. So I am.
You're not going to slander anybody, are you?
Probably. So I was accepted at Temple for my PhD, and I'm at Temple and studying for my PhD, and my advisor was a guy named Leonard Savitz, probably still alive. Wrote a couple of books, well respected in sociology, and I failed my exam to move on. So you take a battery of exams, right? And once you do that, then you can write your dissertation. Failed them. Took them a second time. You're allowed to take them twice, and failed it a second time. And the second time, Leonard Savitz took me aside and said, look, not only did you get every question right, but there's one question you got right that was an error in it, and you're the only one that caught it. And there was one of the questions that dealt with Robert Merton's theory of anomie and social structure that I flunked it by one of the professors, a guy named Bruce Mayhew. Hi, Bruce, if you're out there. And I decided, and Leonard Savitz said, there's nothing we can do. Each professor decides for himself. I cannot make Bruce Mayhew change it. But what I can do for you is get you a full ride at the law school here. And I said, fine, I'll take that. That's the only reason I went to law school at Temple. At the time I was teaching, I was a professor at Trenton State College. But even though you got all the questions right, you were failed Right.
because of what discrimination against you being a law and order person?
Oh, look at that. So I go see Bruce Mayhew and I say to him, why'd you do that? And
Mhm.
he said, I am not going to be party to giving a police officer credentials. And there was nothing I could do about that. But what I did do while I was in law school, because it annoyed me so much, is I wrote a letter to Robert Merton, tracked him down. He was the head of I think the Sociology Association, the National Sociological Association, and was head of the sociology program at Columbia. I wrote him a letter and I said, here's how I answered the question. I don't want you to do anything about it, but this is what I said about your theory of social structure and anomie. Did I get it right? And he responded by saying, I can't interfere with another professor's judgment, but
Mhm.
if you want to finish your PhD at Columbia, I'll get you in. And that's
Yeah.
how I got to Columbia.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so I commuted after law school. I commuted to Columbia University and got my master's and then my PhD, took the exams, passed them,
And
and
so
got my
this was
PhD.
while you were a cop, or where does this fit into your copdom
So
thing?
in 1971 or two, right around 72, criminal justice programs were starting up all over the country. John Jay College changed its name from the College of Police Science to because that was too cute. It spells cops. To John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and other
Mm.
criminal justice programs were starting. Trenton State College wanted to start one. They were looking around for somebody with a doctorate in criminal justice and police experience. I interviewed. I said, all I have is a master's, but there's only one person in the country with a doctorate, and that's Leonard Niederhofer, I think it was. And they looked around and then called me and said, you're right, and offered me a job teaching at Trenton State College. I took the job and left the cops because my wife had left me.
Mm.
She's from Kentucky and left me with our two little children. My daughter was 2.5. My son was 3 months old. And at first, I got really pissed off. I mean, I'm
Sure.
25 years old, 26 years old, and I'm a cop. And now I have these two little kids. And then I fell in love with these two little kids. And I wanted a job where I could take them to school and pick them up after school. So I started looking around for a teaching job. And Trenton State College was starting a criminal justice program, applied for it, left the cops from 65 to 72. So after 7 years, and became a professor and signed up for a PhD at Temple. The truth.
Stop right there,
Okay.
because one of the things I found interesting about your background is that while you were a cop, you were sent to Woodstock to provide security at this, massive outdoor. Uh, what was it? It was a mess, basically.
It
I mean,
was.
do you even remember what was going on? I mean,
I
the
do.
the marijuana was probably, pretty in the air, I guess.
It was another one of those points for me. So I was a cop and a Republican, of course, because liberals didn't like me. Um, and I got to Woodstock. So there were two groups at police. There were the local police that basically were in uniform and they were on the highways. And then there was the New York City Police Department. And there was some give and take between the police commissioner and the people running it. But eventually we could take the time off. There's a group of us and go up there because there's going to be like maybe up to 100,000 people showing up. They thought more like 20,000.
It
They
was like
sold
500. It
tickets.
wasn't it
It's a
500,000?
500,000 people.
Yeah.
But they had ticket booths up, and we got there early, a bunch of us, and we stayed at a dude ranch. We didn't wear our uniforms. We didn't have guns. We wore a red shirt that said peace on the back and the symbol and a little jacket, khaki pants, and a pith helmet. Looked silly. And so red was security and green was the administration and different colors.
Uh-huh.
And Wes Pomeroy was the head of security. He hired us. He was a police chief, I think, in California and maybe in Washington, but I'm not sure. But the first day after we took down the ticket booths, nobody was buying tickets. Everybody. He got up on stage, and this crowd, this incredible crowd with us, and said the Red Jackets are NYPD cops. They're off duty, and everybody booed.
Yeah, right.
And Wes Pomeroy said, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he said, there's only 3 rules. Don't hurt anybody. Don't take somebody else's stuff. And if someone is in trouble, help them or call us and we'll help them. Those are the only 3 rules. And everyone cheered. And I remember thinking, what a brilliant move from this guy. You don't have to be the fastest gun in town. You're not going to control this group or make them do what you want to do. But they're here to have a good time. I mean, there was Hell's Angels, there was the Black Panther Party, there was the greatest mix that could be trouble you could dream of. And there was no trouble. And I wound up walking around most of the time. Most of the time you could go back and rest, but I wound up walking around and talking to these kids and what they believed in and peace. And we agreed on almost everything except the draft. I felt strongly that if you get rid of the draft, only poor people would be in the Army. If you want to stop something, rich people have to have a stake in it. Their sons and daughters have to be drafted. And if they're not going to be drafted, nobody's going to care.
So let me stop you there for a second, because up until this point, you had been stunned at the racism in this country and how liberals treated you when you got out. And now you are, in a sense, a symbol of the man in this rock concert arena. And you're talking to these liberal kids who basically, hate the military, hate the cops. And yet you are talking to these people. And, things are polarized now, but they were really polarized back in the late 60s and early 70s. And, there were bombings and riots. And so to be in the middle of Woodstock as a cop, talking to these, for lack of a better word, enemies, that again must have been life-changing.
2 things. First, not just talking to them and learning about them and what they're believing, but I'm on stage and helping move things around. I had just a short sleeve shirt on, the red peace shirt, and Jimi Hendrix points at me and says, "Hoptown." And I say back to him, "Hoptown?" And he says, "Hoptown." And I realized he could see part of my tattoo. I have a tattoo on my left arm that says 101st Paratroopers.
Because Hendrix was in the service.
I didn't know that. He was 101st Paratrooper, and he was referring to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, because he knew where I went to get that tattoo. I got to talk to Janis Joplin and telling me how nervous she is. And she prays to God that she will be of some use when she sings. And I'm realizing that the things that I know about me are things about them. So, for example, I come back from Woodstock and I am different. I'm in a line at Washington Square Park and holding back a crowd of all these kids, NYU kids. And my partner and I and all was standing there and keeping them back, and they're yelling at us and calling us pigs and stuff like that. And this one sweet young co-ed from NYU, and again, I'm only like 26 years old, but now I'm back from,
Mhm.
I've been in bigger crowds. And, and she says to me, I don't know how you can do this. You're a pig. And
Mhm.
I said, wow, that really hurts my feelings. You don't even know me.
Mhm.
And you would call me a pig. You know nothing about me. And she says, oh, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And I'm realizing that even in these kinds of situations, even these tense situations, I, I went back to Mrs. Singer in my head,
Mhm.
and I'm talking to a kid. We're talking to each other about stuff that is affecting her and how she feels about the world and
The
stuff.
the key word that you just said, or the key phrase, we're talking with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it's it's easy and it makes sense. And you can have 500,000 people all disagreeing about politics, listening to music in the rain and mud for 3 days, and nobody gets hurt. We could do that. We are able to do that. We don't want to do that anymore for some reason, but we can do that. Um,
I want to jump ahead. You were the deputy chief counsel for the President's Commission on Organized Crime.
I was
Um, so this was Reagan, am I
Reagan.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you get the gig, and what was that like? What did you all do?
Oh, it's a great gig. I love that gig. Um, I was um, I was the chief counsel for the Senate, U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations.
Right.
I got that gig, doesn't matter, but I got that gig, and it was under the Republican administration. Senator Roth was the senator from Delaware, and Senator Biden was the Democratic leader in that. And it was the year, so it had to be it had to be what, 84, 85. The election switched, and Biden became the chief. And so they needed a new senior counsel. I had a friend who was looking for somebody to be the chief counsel for Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime, and to write 3 reports, work with this. And so they hired me. They interviewed me and hired me. And so I got the gig primarily because I lost the gig at the Senate because of the election.
Okay.
Um, but it was a wonderful gig. It was researching money laundering, researching the war on drugs, finding out it's not working. This is in 85, finding out it's not working.
Just
Um,
say no isn't really
no,
quite a
yeah,
policy, right?
right. It's not
Yeah.
working. And
Yeah.
and it is, not only is it not working, but it's producing income for organized crime. And so interviewing some organized crime leaders and their attorneys, they wanted to cut a deal with the commission, with the United States, basically saying that they will pay taxes on all their ill-gotten gains, whatever tax you want to charge them, as long as they can't be charged for the crime they committed. And we wouldn't do it. We
Good.
wouldn't do it. They wanted to do it because that was cheaper than laundering the money and easier.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't do it. At one point,
And that was a bipartisan agreement not to do it.
that's right. That's
Mhm.
exactly right. At one
Okay.
point, we looked at banks, whether or not we were going to charge banks with something in Miami. And so we examined the dollar bills, the $5, all the money, to see if there were any traces of cocaine. And if there was, we would bring, well, all of the money had traces of cocaine. So
Yeah. Yeah.
We stopped that.
Uh-huh.
But generally, we wound up I talked to mob lawyers in prison in Texarkana, um, to crime bosses, to Jackie Presser, to everybody.
Okay. I want to, this is an unrehearsed conversation. You didn't get the questions ahead of time, primarily because I'm making it up as I go. But, we are now you said earlier that you hate bullies. I mean,
Yes,
that goes all the way back to when you were a kid.
yes,
So, Trump has just been indicted for the second time on federal charges.
yes,
Arguably, he was the bully in chief.
yes.
That's just me talking, but I'd be interested, because of your role with the investigating organized crime. You know, I'd like your thoughts on Trump and what's going on now.
Wow, I'm in trouble. So I I ran from the Republican Party um, after we left Afghanistan and went into Iraq.
Mhm.
Um,
Why?
I knew that was made up. I knew they were lying to us. I wanted them to stay in I wanted us to stay in Afghanistan until we got Osama bin Laden. I
Mhm.
understand that if your father is threatened by somebody and you become president, you might want to go after that guy. But I thought it was wrong to use our troops. I thought it was wrong to leave Afghanistan before we got Osama bin Laden, and I thought it was wrong to make up the crap about
We didn't
what.
really we didn't really leave Afghanistan. We just were fighting two wars. One, the Afghanistan was where the Taliban was headquartered, but we, in a sense, expanded it and went into Iraq as well, right?
Good point. Good point. I stand corrected. That's exactly right. I did not like making up about the weapons of mass destruction. That was clear to me. I mean, these are kids I know. Uh,
So you
thank you.
said you
Go ahead.
so you said you left the Republican Party at that point.
At that point.
But my original question is, what do you think about the Republican Party now? I would argue that it's a Trump cult.
You know, I think it's two things. I think
Mhm.
now, first of all, Trump, it's not just you saying it. Trump is a bully. Trump takes pride in being a bully. I knew Trump when I was a cop, knew him. I first met him when Tom Kenny, my partner, and I were in a diner someplace, and we were getting a cup of coffee to go. And there was this young man. Trump was sitting at a table with two or three of his buddies,
Did you
and
know it was Trump at the time?
yeah, and he
Okay.
was berating everybody knew who Trump was, and he was berating a waitress. Just terrible, just terrible. And I had it. I mean, the bully thing in me had it. And she was walking away from Trump, and I was walking toward the table, and she put her hand on my chest and she said, "Please don't. I'll lose my job."
Mhm.
I turned around and went back to Tom Kenny, and I said, "We should do something." And Tom Kenny, he was the old guy in the car. I was 23, he was 26,
Mhm.
and we just left. But that was
What
typical
would
of
you
Trump.
what would you have done
I
had
would have
she not?
arrested him. I don't know
Really?
exactly what
For
for.
what? On what
Yeah,
charge?
I don't know. I don't know. But I would have arrested him. And I said,
You could have changed the course of history here, dude.
yeah, I don't. But he is a stone con man and a bully that would love and that would love nothing more in his life than to be a mob boss. That's what he wants. I think that's his dream.
And the only reason he's not is he's not Italian?
Well, there's two reasons he's not. First, his mother's not Italian, and second, he would rat everybody out. I mean, he would say it's everybody else's fault. I didn't do it. They all did it. Um,
Mhm.
a good crime boss will go down. for what he did. He'll accept responsibility for what he did.
Mm. Mm.
Trump, what I think about this indictment is, so I'm a man without a party, basically. I think there is a Trump cult.
Mm.
I think everything he says. So I'm an old altar boy. And when I hear people say, I am being prosecuted for you, for your
Mm.
sins, they are
Whoa.
persecuting me for your sins. That's
Mhm.
no longer a politician. And that is not somebody that I would see as part of a Christian religion.
Uh-huh.
Um, his following is something very different than Republicans, just Republicans. The rest of the Republican Party, I think, have become cowards. Simply that. If you are willing to say to a soldier, thank you for your service, even if you don't mean it, but you're willing to recognize that there are young men and women that are willing to put their life on the line for our country, and you are not willing to put a vote on the line for our country or for what's right, then shame on you. So I don't think the Republican Party is basically a cult. I think the Trump followers, the mega group, are a cult. The
Mhm.
Republican Party are cowards, just simply cowards, and not willing to risk a vote for their country. Not only not putting party before country, they're not willing to even risk a vote.
Well, so what are they afraid of?
They're afraid of being embarrassed because Trump will come at them like a child, and that's what bullies do publicly. And they'll berate them. I know bullies that will, in corporations or in businesses, that would berate others in the office and create a hostile work environment. I think Trump has created a hostile work environment within the Republican Party, and they are frightened of that hostility. The fright is two things. One is you're going to embarrass me, and second, you're going to put up money for somebody to run against me, and I will lose my wealth, safety, and deference. I'll lose all
So,
three of those.
so Trump will be on trial right in the thick of the 2024 presidential election.
Yep.
It is entirely possible that by the time the election happens, it's possible he will be a convicted felon.
Yep.
And yet there is nothing that will prevent him from taking office at this point. How do you think this is going to play out? Is he, do you believe, going to go to prison, which seems almost unbelievable given his Teflon uh, ability to squirt out from under all kinds of issues? Do you see him actually going to prison? How's this going to end?
Yeah, I think he does. I think just like John Gotti, I think at some point the Teflon disappears. I think he goes to prison. I think he still gets the nomination. I think it was back, wasn't it back at the beginning, like in the 1900s, where somebody actually ran for president from prison and got almost 1 million votes, I think.
Boy, I'm not sure, but we'll have, that's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
worth looking into.
I think that happened once, and got 900,000 votes, but ran for president from prison. I think, I think Trump will run for president from prison. I think he'll get the nomination because this cult following, this is not. I think that's what DeSantis is missing and others are missing. It's not about being further right than Trump. It's about Trump being this religious figure, and he has a following. You're not going to you're not going to step between him and his religious following. Um, so I think he'll get the nomination. I think he'll lose, and I think he'll run in 4 years from prison again. I think he needs to keep running. Now, I also think,
Well, he certainly makes, every time he gets indicted, he makes more money.
yeah, yeah, and he gets his followers are more solidified.
Right.
At some point they all drink the Kool-Aid and die. I mean, followers are willing to do that. They're not going to desert him. And he knew that when he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote. I think he will lose votes. I think he'll lose independents. I think he'll lose right-thinking Republicans. I think cowardly Republicans might gain some backbone if he's actually in prison. I know Pence came out with a stronger statement recently. I don't understand the cowardness I don't understand the cowardness of the Republican Party. I do understand the cult-like following of Trump.
So let's talk about writing. I'm writing a political thriller right now that is sort of a little farther in the future than where we are now. And I'll probably piss off half the country. I'm still working on the first draft, almost done. We won't go there. I want to talk about your writing because before we talk about your fiction, mention the nonfiction books that you've written, because you've written 7 of those.
Oh no, they're terrible. They're terrible. One, they're the Wisconsin criminal trial practice. It's a law book. Alabama criminal trial practice. Alabama criminal trial. There's a book on money laundering. A book on the drug war. A book on breaking down organized crime today, which was in 1985, so it's probably a little bit out of date. My mother made sure that I put in there that organized crime is not just Italians. There are other people that are in. So I said at the beginning that I wish I wrote the nonfiction first, because I think my fiction first, because I think my nonfiction would have been more creative. But then it's not. If you're a lawyer and you want to read about money laundering and you want the details, great. Or if you're practicing law in Alabama, if you're cousin Vinny, pick up criminal trial practice in Alabama or criminal trial practice in Wisconsin, which probably has been updated by now. But then so
you're on the board of the Wisconsin Writers Association, and you are also we are co-members of the Blackbird Writers Group.
I love that group. I know
Blackbird Tracy Writers. Phillips in the Madison, Wisconsin area. You live in Middleton. I used to work as a reporter in Madison, so I have a warm spot in my heart for Wisconsin. I try to get there as often as I can.
I love reporters, by the way.
Thank you. You are one of the few.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you've already talked about Weepers, which was your first novel, but let's talk about Nunzio's Way, because again, that's set in New York City in about 1960, which is when you were still in your prime as a gang member, and you mentioned Nunzio is sort of based on your uncle. Am I right?
That's right, my uncle Mario. I was going to use Mario's real name. And Weepers.
But you don't want to sleep with the fishes here. Right?
No. And he said to me, no, I get enough publicity. Don't use my name. And I asked him, what name should we use? And he said, Nunzio. It's my favorite pizza place. So that's how Nunzio goes. I'll talk about Nunzio, but can I go back to something that I said offhandedly to explain?
Okay.
I said I love reporters. When I was in Washington on the President's Commission on Organized Crime, I didn't know anything about reporters, really, just to avoid them, basically was the thought. But there was a reporter, I think he was the Washington bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times. His name was Ron Ostro. And he wanted to talk to me and interview me. And so I went up to the office and I was interviewing him. He was interviewing me, and we talked about a lot of stuff. I was very careful. And then he said, well, let me get you some lunch. And I said, well, we'll have lunch together, but I'll pay for my own lunch. And he said, okay. And we got in the elevator, and he said, geez, I don't know how you do it. It must be tough working with the head of the board for the President's Commission. And I said, yeah, he could be tough. And he said to me, that's my lead. And I said, what? And he said, I'm not going to do it, but that's just a lesson for you. You're never off the record. And I said,
Yeah,
thanks, Ron. We became great friends after that.
it's true. It's true. Unless
Uh,
unless it's agreed upon,
that's right.
you're on the record.
That's right.
And unscrupulous reporters can really take advantage of that,
I know.
because if you're not used to dealing with reporters, that can blow up in your face, and of course that doesn't do the profession any good either. Um,
But he was a
so
good guy. So Nunzio.
Nunzio, okay, let's go back to that.
So in 1960, I don't know if it was the first time, but the mayor of New York City, who was a Democrat, was being challenged by the Democratic Party. They refused to support him, and they were looking for somebody else to run. It was also the year that Kennedy was running for president. And so I thought setting this in 1960 was a good next step, and that Nunzio Sabino, the mob boss, his lawyer wanted to run for mayor, but he wanted a guarantee that he would win. And Nunzio's way begins with the quote from Nunzio saying to his attorney, in this city, you can have anything you want if you kill the right 4 people. Now, it's also a continuation of Angelo's travels through time. But I wanted to say something more. In Weepers, the focus was primarily on Angelo. I wanted to say something more about what it was like to be a crime boss. I loved The Godfather. I loved the book. I loved the movie. I loved everything about it, except it's not a good crime boss would not be living out in Long Island someplace in a big mansion surrounded by bodyguards. A good crime boss would be living in the neighborhood that he controls. I wanted to make that clear. And they think about the people in the neighborhood as a constituency. So kids in a particular neighborhood, the way I grew up, if I wanted something that generally only a middle class or an upper class kid can get, I might be able to get it by going to Nunzio. And he would pull strings, or somebody would have to pay for it, or something would have to happen. I'm not saying they were nice guys, but the crime bosses I knew and a lot of the soldiers. So in a real crime family, I think everybody knows this by now. In a real crime family, you have a boss, you might have a couple of underbosses, big shots, colonels. Under them, you have the captains, and then under them, you have the soldiers. That's what makes up the family. Under the soldiers were the street workers. Those are the guys that are collecting the numbers and selling the drugs and collecting money from store owners and doing everything else. They work for the soldiers on the street. They're not actually part of the family structure. The kids on the street, the workers, could be bullies. I never much liked them. But generally, once you moved up to captains, those weren't bullies. Those were guys that were trying to run an innovative, if not illegal, organization that takes care of all of the trash in the city, that takes care of all of the whatever it is in the city. But they're running it like a business, and their model is to make money. All they want to do is make money. They're not in it because they like violence or because they want to be tough guys. At least and I'm talking now about either La Casa Nostra is American, right? Mafia is Sicilian. Camorra is Napolitan. But we think of it all as Mafia or La Casa Nostra. It's a money-making organization. my uncle Mario allegedly was part of the Genovese crime family. It was alleged. His brother Vincent wound up going to prison because he would walk around Greenwich Village wearing a robe and pretending to be crazy. And finally, he was arrested and charged and died in prison. Mario's other brother, Louis, my Uncle Louis, was a priest in New York who died, I think, recently, not too long ago. But they all loved each other, and we all got along. And Mario Nunzio was beyond street smarts. He was, the expression, he had a lot of rock sense.
Mm-hmm.
So like the people that work in the mines, they know the rocks, they know where the dangers are, what to be careful of, what's a sturdy rock and what's not. He had a lot of that. And he was fairly well read. He gave me The Prince to read. And told me after I read it, and this is when I was still a kid, read The Prince, and I remember saying to him, "Is it true that it's better to be feared than loved?" And Mario said, "No. First of all, he corrected me. Machiavelli said it's safer to be feared than loved, but he's still wrong. My driver would take a bullet for me because he loves me. If he didn't love me, he would step aside and let the bullet hit me. And fear tastes like sulfur, but love tastes like Sunday dinner. If I had to pick, I would pick love. But both aren't bad." But he embraced the people in our neighborhood. He embraced the people that were struggling. So when Greeks and Italians, I was Catholic years and years ago, wanted to go to Catholic church, would have to go to the basement of the Irish church because we weren't allowed to worship with the Irish. And eventually there was an Italian Catholic church where we could go. Well, Mario was the guy you went to if the troubles you were having were beyond your control.
You also were the director of the Wisconsin State Public Defender Agency. So you've been in a sense on both sides of law enforcement, right?
Yeah, but you know what? It's the same side. Once you realize that you could talk to people, once you realize that there's not so many good guys and bad guys. I mean, there's some pretty creepy bad guys out there, but most people are trying to skate by, a whole lot of people. And people that are not sophisticated about the criminal justice process, when they're arrested, when they're picked up, it's like they landed on Mars. And the system seems to be a bully to me at that point. So I remember saying to a judge, I remember a judge in Wisconsin berating a woman because she was late. She hadn't showed up for court yet. And him saying to the woman when she finally did show up, "The most important thing you had to do today was to be in front of me at this time." And on the side later, I said to the judge, "This woman lives in a car with 2 little children. The most important thing she had to do today was find someplace safe for those 2 little children, and then to be in your courtroom on time."
How did the judge respond?
He actually apologized. But he doesn't know that. We don't know that. We think poor people are, living at home and they're buying steaks with welfare money and they have cars and big TVs. And life is just grand and everybody else is paying their way, and that's not it. That's not. Anyway, I got off topic. Um, you're
Well, but
terrible.
not necessarily, because you're talking. I was under the assumption that if you're a prosecutor and you're a defense attorney, you're there. Those are two vastly different perspectives, and I think what you're saying is not so much.
Not so much. So I received, very proud of it, I received an award from the Sons of the American Revolution for law enforcement. And I received an award from the Legal Aid Society in Milwaukee for criminal defense. And I think what it means is that nobody is above the law and nobody's under the law. I think my bias is that those who have less in life should have more in law. But at least I want to make sure they have the same stuff in law that somebody else has.
What do you mean in law?
I mean that a woman living in a car with 2 kids, the judge should say, you know what, Mrs. Smith, you get here when you can get here. The law will wait for you. Not will wait for Donald Trump. You get here when you're supposed to get here. You can get here. Mm-hmm. But Mrs. Smith, I understand your circumstances. You get here when you can. Make sure those kids are safe first. That's what
okay. You and I could go on all day, but I do, before we end this, I do want to talk about the creative process, because you did say that your nonfiction books would be a lot better if you'd written your novels first. So what have you learned about writing by writing fiction? The process, how it's done, because a lot of people that are in the classes I teach are, in a sense, looking almost for a second career. They've retired in some cases from successful careers, and they have this urge to write, but they don't necessarily have a clue. They don't know about the business. They don't know about the process. So what have you learned that I think that I can use in my classes to inspire others? What advice do you have based on what you've learned?
I wish you didn't say inspired. The most important thing I think I learned is in writing fiction is don't be in a rush. Slow down. Edit it and edit it and edit it again and again and again. I made a mistake with Weepers. I had an in with a very good agent at a very good agency in New York City, and didn't edit the manuscript very well. And of course, it came back to me. I didn't know, because in writing nonfiction, I just send in a manuscript and they do big things with it, and then they send it back to me and I do stuff, and
it's magic.
Yeah. But to make sure that it is so well edited, you have to let it go at some point. If you read it for me, if I read it more than 5 times, I'm bored to death. It's done. I am done. So by the 4th draft, I am deep editing and making it as polished and as good as I possibly can. And I try to get there by reading a lot of poetry. Going back to Mrs. Singer.
Why poetry?
Because I firmly believe that any kind of writer's block is not a block of the brain or trying to come up with the right word. It is a block of the heart. It is you are not able to move the person. It is you're not able to express the feeling. You're not finding that feeling. And so when that moment comes, take a walk, listen to your favorite music, close your eyes, Read poetry. That's what J.D. Salinger did. Read poet. He loved Japanese poetry. His words in his use of, I think I might have mentioned this to you, so stop me if I did. There's a short story by J.D. Salinger called A Girl I Knew. And it, originally, by the way, side note, originally it was called Ween Ween, W-E-I-N, W-E-I-N, and the editors at Good Housekeeping changed the title, and he never published with them again. But in the short story, on page, it's a 9-page short story, and like on page 7 in a narrative, in the middle of a narrative, there's a sentence that goes something like, and there she was doing nothing. There she was standing on the balcony, doing nothing that I can tell at all, except holding the railing and the universe together. You don't throw away a line like that in the middle of a narrative, unless when you're taking a break, you're reading poetry and you're being moved by stuff and you're listening to music. Mm-hmm. And so we can write the right words down and we can tell a story, and with a plot that might even be interesting. We can all do that. And we can tell the story in such a way that you understand every word we're saying. But if you don't leave that story feeling something, if when you think about that story, it doesn't raise an emotion, like her letter by Bret Harte when I was in the 4th grade made me cry. And I'm not even sure why. He never said she was crying in the whole poem, but it moved. His words moved me in that. Now, if you're not going to do that as a writer, then you're just writing. But if you want to move your reader, then read poetry, listen to music as you're doing this, reread what you've written. Say, how can I, isn't it magic, John, that if I could write, isn't it magic that J.D. Salinger wrote this short story in 1947, probably, or 48. And there is a line in that short story that today I read and I was moved by it. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to do that as a writer, then let me change that. You should want to, you need to want to do that as a writer. You need to want to move somebody 50 years from now when they read your words. That's what I think I would tell them.
So have your email up on the screen. So I guess your website is under construction, but if people want to contact you, they can get you at nickchiarkas@gmail.com. And it's, even though it's pronounced Chiarkas, like DeDakis is pronounced DeDakis, it's Chiarkas. It looks like Chiarkas, but and John, some of your relatives do.
Could you put a dot between Nick and Chiarkas?
I sure can. Let me thank you. That's why we have editors. So let me fix that.
Wait.
So we'll make sure that we get it right here. Thank you for catching that. And we'll update it and give people a chance to hold on. How do I do this? Is a low budget operation here, Nick. Nick.Chiarkas. So it's NICK.CHIARKAS@gmail.com. Thank you for that correction.
Thank you.
And look, before we go, what else? What's next for you? I mean, you've already done a lot in your life. If you want to just put your feet up and call it a day, I would understand. But something tells me you're not done yet.
No, I'm working on The Lion and the Fox, which will be the 3rd book in the Weepers Crybaby series. I'm doing that. I am rewriting Weepers. Just the publisher's coming out with a second edition, so I'm going through it and getting, not rewriting, but getting rid of nits and edits and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, there's
Um,
always something.
yeah, so that kind of stuff.
Okay. And before we go, anything else that you want to say that I haven't covered?
I would like to say, and for no good reason at all, the biggest thing I learned from Woodstock and my life is that love and kindness trumps bullying and hate. It does every single time. Have the courage to do that.
That's wonderful. We've been one-to-one with Nick Chiarkas. I'm John DeDakis. You've been one-to-one with me. Nick, to be continued. I'll be seeing you on the circuit, I'm sure. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.